Welcome back to the BJJ Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Ford. My guest today is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. He's also a black belt in Judo. He's a former Navy SEAL Master Chief and a member of SEAL Team 6. He completed 16 combat deployments during his 30-year career. He's also a Naval Special Operations Combatives instructor, as well as a small arms instructor, a range safety officer, and a breaching instructor. He also teaches, he's also a breathology master instructor, and he specializes in post-traumatic stress management using breathology. He's also the founder of the Four Pillars Collective, which is a nonprofit organization helping train and prepare our nation's law enforcement officers. He also has a private firm where he helps executives and families, everyday families and businesses prepare for security and safety measures. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be joined today by Jason Henderson. How are you today, Jason?
I'm doing good, Ryan. Thank you for having me.
Of course. No, it's a pleasure to have you here, sir. I really appreciate your time. Jason, obviously, anyone that listens to the show probably trains jiu-jitsu, right? And for some reasons, people train for different reasons. Some people train to pursue the sport of jiu-jitsu and compete and just be involved in a physical activity. And other people are really attracted to the self-defense side of martial arts and choose to train jiu-jitsu for those reasons. So I'm really interested in picking your brain here today to hear how you feel jiu-jitsu has impacted your life and your work. So I appreciate you taking the time. The question I always like to start with, tell us about where you're from originally and what your life was like before you got into jiu-jitsu.
Sure. So originally I'm from Oregon, from a really small town, about 1,500 people, kind of a wrestling-centric town. Grew up wrestling, playing football, boxing. That was pretty much my background coming up. Before I became a SEAL, I was going to college a little bit and I was logging. The timber industry went down kind of at the time because of environmental terrorism. So I had to find another line of work at the time. The first Gulf War started, so joining the military made sense.
Did you have a lot of family in the military, or were you the first one in your family to be a military person?
No, I have, uncles, and a lot of my family members had been. I think every male in my family history has been in the military in one aspect or fought in a war somewhere along the lines.
That's great, man. Well, I appreciate your service. Let me ask you this. How did you find jiu-jitsu initially?
Sure. So in the 90s, I came into the SEAL teams in 1990. And at that time, there wasn't really jiu-jitsu. Just to kind of go through the evolution of combatives within the SEAL teams. It was more just wrestling and striking centric. The guys didn't really have a mixed martial arts background because it didn't exist at the time. So we were bringing in all kinds of different experts from all over. And it was mostly like pain compliance and different types of martial arts. One of them was mandated actually by an admiral who I think was getting a cut of the money for it because he was saying, this is the most effective fighting style that you guys should use. It was a terrible fighting style. And I think he himself had probably never been in a fight in his life. So we were curious on why it was that he mandated this. So a lot of the guys were rough guys. A lot of guys in the SEAL teams come from, tougher backgrounds, come from wrestling and football and arenas where they were used to kind of that rough style of combat. So as we grew up in that era, the wars kind of started for us. I was in Kosovo and Bosnia and stuff, but there wasn't a lot of hand-to-hand stuff going on, not until we went to Iraq. And in Iraq in 2003 is when we were like, oh, wow, we were just dogpiling on people. And it was really an ineffective way of fighting. You end up hitting your buddy more than you're hitting the opponent. And we were using excessive force. We weren't really good at control. And so we were like, hey, we really need to neck down and become better at martial arts. I actually had a kind of a traumatic incident that happened to me. It was probably my third or fourth combat tour in Afghanistan. And up till then, I was just, wrestling, boxing, and kickboxing. I had kickboxed all through the 90s and Thailand and Asia. But I came in, there was a guy sleeping on the ground. When I approached him, I put my knee on his chest. He was wearing a chest rack. He had a gun off to his side. I put my knee on his chest. I controlled his hands. He started fighting. So we got into a scrap. I was pounding away on him and I was starting to get tired. I mean, I'd already hiked like 10 miles into the target. And so I was already pre-fatigued a little bit. This guy, when he wakes up, he feels me on top of his chest. He looks up. All he sees is the green glow on my eyes from night vision goggles. So I'm sure he thought, the devil was on top of him. So we got into a pretty good fight, and I was getting tired, and he was starting to climb up me. I still was in a mounted position, but he was climbing up me and digging in at my eyes, and I'm hitting him with elbows. I'm hitting him with everything. And I was trying to roll him over because I'm thinking I'm going to have to kill him at this point. I was kind of feeling around for my knife. I didn't want to shoot because I didn't want the entire building to find out who was there. So as I was holding this guy down and kind of pounding away and trying to get a choke on him, I took a breath. And when I took a breath in, then I was able to kind of notice what was going on in the rest of the room. And in the rest of the room, I saw his wife, and it was holding a baby. And I saw this little girl whose eyes kind of burned into my head. And I was thinking, what am I doing? I'm going to kill this guy because I don't train, because I don't make an extra effort to learn effective defensive tactics. So I was able to subdue him, get him handcuffed, and get him off target. And as soon as I got back, I was like, we got to find out who the best fighting instructors are in the world. And so we brought in everybody. And to be honest with you, when we made a list of all the different scenarios where we got into all these hand-to-hand situations on the battlefield, whether it was in stairwells or in vehicles or whatever, only really 2 or 3 guys had real solutions. The rest were just the fake karate fighting type of people. So we started coming up with solutions, and we started testing and evaluating these tactics and techniques. And then that's kind of what I'm presenting now.
That's incredible. Jason, what I really appreciate about that story, first of all, thanks for sharing such a candid story, man. That really is a pretty crazy situation. I appreciate where you were coming from there. I felt that there was 2 places you were coming from. One was that I want to be as efficient as I can possibly be as a warrior, as a soldier. Yeah. But secondly, there was also a place of compassion that you came from there, where you were saying, like, man, I really should be able to just control this guy and not have to kill him, especially in front of his family. So all these things came together as ultimately you're pursuing efficiency in every way possible. And I appreciated the way you told that story. So it's something that I've heard a lot from both police officers and from military personnel is that a voice of frustration. The curriculums and the structure that you guys had before wasn't as efficient as it's become, as things like the Modern Army Combatives program and McMap and other things like that are around. Explain the evolution, if you don't mind. So when you first started around the Gulf War, you said it wasn't really until Iraq that you started noticing things getting much better as far as the quality of instruction and quality of content that you guys are learning for hand-to-hand combat. What changed that, do you think, and how dramatic of a difference was it?
Well, to be honest with you, we just really didn't know anything about fighting, period. The people that mentored us were from Vietnam, and fighting in Vietnam, 30 years prior is completely different than fighting in Iraq or Afghanistan. And so we had to relearn everything. We had to learn hostage rescue training. We had to learn our hostage rescue missions, high value target takedowns, barricaded shooters, putting hands on people. One of the big things that people don't take in, because fighting hurts, right? You go to the gym, you train, it hurts. It does. So people don't want to do it very often. A lot of law enforcement does it like 1 week a year. But every target that I've hit, I may or may not shoot somebody, but I'm always putting hands on people. And we spent all this time shooting, day in, day out, shooting. But majority of your time really should be spent putting hands on people and learning how to control them and control them properly. It's gone in a lot of different directions. But one of the things that I learned was, when I started doing a lot of jiu-jitsu and a lot of striking, essentially mixed martial arts, people say, well, what's your fighting style? It's just a mixture of everything. It's silly to say there's one martial arts. And even if you say that this martial art is the best for it, you're not evolving or getting better, right? The enemy's constantly improving too. So really just taking the best from everybody and then testing it and evaluating it. But one of the things that I found is that the more fighting that I did, the more time I spent in the mat room, the more I made my guys go in and train with me, the more effective we were on the battlefield and the less people we shot, because we were very calm. If somebody hit us with a shovel, if somebody tackled us, we were calm, relaxed. You get out of that situation, you control them, get them handcuffed, get them off target. And the more people that we arrested, the less people we killed, the more people we arrested, the more they tattled on each other. So our target deck kept expanding. Once I shoot somebody, intelligence is over. There's not much more information to gain off of it. So actually, by being effective at hand-to-hand combat, not only saved a lot of our lives, but it saved a lot of the bad guys' lives, because the reality is you get an idea of a target. They're like, okay, you're supposed to be a bad guy here. There may or may not be a bad guy there. You take down that house and it could just be somebody that was letting him stay there, or a family member or something like that. So you don't want to just go in and do all this collateral damage to the enemy zones and areas that we fought, because one, you're turning people who otherwise wouldn't be your enemy into your enemy. And also, when you're using just brutality, the next generation that comes up is going to remember you using extra force that wasn't necessary against their parents and grandparents and mothers even. And we saw it with law enforcement when I got out of the military in 2020. At the time it was COVID, there was riots going on everywhere. And I'm like, okay, what is everybody complaining about? Why are they rioting? And they're saying, okay, police brutality, right? It's after the George Floyd thing. So I'm like, okay, well then I'll go teach it. So people should teach it. Everybody that's been in hand-to-hand combat has spent a lot of time fighting putting work in the gym, getting up in those early hours at 5 a.m., going to the gym and training, and still doing a full work day. Those are all experts. The whole country is filled with them, and they should all be going to different law enforcement agencies and first responders. And even, I also train people at hospitals, the hospital workers, not just security, because, the family members that come in there are distraught. They want to see their kids or whatever that just got hurt. So they're going to fight the doctors to get through them. And I would probably be the same way. So you don't want to hurt those people. You just want to control them until you can calm them down. And that's why, I build emotional intelligence and critical thinking and stress mitigation into all aspects of my training. And I do a lot of scenario-based training so that they become desensitized to when these things happen. Like, oh, I've kind of been here before in the training environment. So now in the real world, I can react appropriately. And especially with law enforcement nowadays, with third-party awareness and just having an understanding of your digital signature, everything you do is filmed. You're not only the camera you're wearing, but everybody's going to film it and edit it. So I always use the example, if somebody goes up and, grabs my wife or something in a bar, and I start fighting with the guy, and all they see me is beating the guy's butt, there's going to be like Navy SEAL beats up innocent bystander in a bar. But if I'm yelling at him, no, leave her alone, I said stop. If I'm yelling and being calm and effective with how I'm controlling that person, then no matter what they film, I'm still going to look like I'm in the right.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love what you're saying here, because it's something that's come up on the show a few times. I've interviewed a few different law enforcement officers and people who have military backgrounds, and we all kind of come to the same conclusion: is that there's so many things that just better training be the solution to a lot of the problems that we see arising. And I appreciate what you said earlier, is that fighting hurts, and a lot of people for that reason don't want to go into a training room all the time and get beat up and get humbled and things like that. And I get that, but like what you said, like on the military side, one of the benefits you mentioned was just intel collection. That's something I never really considered, is that, yeah, you're right. Like if you're more effective at subduing someone, you can certainly gather a lot more beneficial things than just eliminating the person. And I could see where that could apply to the law enforcement side as well, where you're able to build better community relations with people if you're able to control.
That's
instead
right.
of, yeah. And it seems like if people are not going into a training room, well, then that forces them to only rely on one thing. That's their tools, their weapons and stuff. So what do you typically run into as far as resistance when you're out there trying to spread the word and trying to teach these kinds of things that you teach to law enforcement agencies across the country? Is it difficult to get in sometimes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. In some areas, like in the larger cities like Chicago and New York, they're like, our department says they don't want Navy SEALs training us in anything because they don't want them to weaponize law enforcement, but it couldn't be more the opposite. Yeah. The reality is that we have a lot of hand-to-hand experience in combat. And like I said, we did everything possible to not do any collateral damage because we were a surgical force. We're professionals. So getting the guys off of target, not hurting anybody else is really important. And so I would say there isn't anybody that's more of an expert at it than we are. So yeah, I get some of that because I'm military, people don't want us in. A lot of departments, just start like, we don't have the time to train because we're being so filled with this other stuff, diversity and equity and things like that they don't have. No, there's no funding going towards training and combatives. But there is a lot of law enforcement groups that are on their own training. When I go to Chicago, it's like a speakeasy. They'll get a gym and The cops will come in on Saturday on their day off, and the room's packed with people, and they all train and work hard and put in a full day of effort and are super enthusiastic about it. Even though they're not getting paid for it, it's on their off time. But law enforcement care. Well, majority of them care, and majority of them want to train. They just need opportunities, and I think every jiu-jitsu or mixed martial arts gym should give a huge discount for first responders to come in and train, because they're keeping your area safe, your family safe. I never would have gone overseas. I say it all the time. I never would have deployed ever if I didn't know that there was an effective force back here protecting my family.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'm based out of Atlanta. I live abroad, but my home base is Atlanta, Georgia. And Atlanta, there's a city right outside of Atlanta called Marietta, and they started making it mandatory for officers to attend jiu-jitsu classes. They found that since they've had this program operational, that officer-involved shootings and complaints and things like that have dropped like tremendously over the last couple of years. It's a pretty young program, so I've always said, like, man, if we could just get more people training jiu-jitsu, more officers training jiu-jitsu. There's so many opportunities for the application of something like grappling or an effective control that could just minimize a lot of complaints, a lot of problems, and keep them safe in the process. So let me ask you this: you told us this story about the time where you felt overwhelmed before you knew jiu-jitsu, and that's when you realized you really needed to start taking your hand-to-hand training more seriously. Since becoming a black belt in jiu-jitsu, since making that journey, do you have any stories that you can share of times where your jiu-jitsu was very effective in a dangerous hand-to-hand situation?
Oh, all the time. I was in hand-to-hand like every third or fourth target. You know what I mean? Wow. You put hands on people and they don't want to go with you, and that's all over the world. And yeah, I mean, on a regular basis, where we see it the most is when you're doing 2-on-1 type of grappling, because 1-on-1 is fairly controlling, but you end up in, even though I prefer guys to stay knee on and not go into full mount. You kind of end up in those situations where it's a little too tight. So you end up kind of rolling back and forth. And the bad guys train too. I mean, the Chechens and Dagestanis, they're not always on the right side. Sometimes they're fighting for the opposing team, so to speak. So, they're grappling culture, fighting culture. So you're going to run into people that occasionally can fight, and also really big guys. So the 2-on-1s was more important, of really getting a good understanding of one guy going high, one guy going low, one controlling the legs, one controlling the arms. Kimura is probably the most important thing you can learn when you're trying to control somebody, and get their hands into a cuffing position. Wrist ride and Kimura are definitely the two most important. Yeah. So yeah, all the time. And even, especially wasn't so much with us on the battlefield, but for law enforcement, just being really effective from a judo standpoint on trips and taking people down without picking them up and slamming them. Because when you have an understanding of, if I throw somebody and they crack their head open on the ground, or if I suplex somebody, then there's going to be extra damage that is unnecessary. And one, you're going to look bad on CNN that night. And two, you're going to do extra damage than what you needed to. So having good tripping and takedown, single leg, double leg skills, where you're not getting caught, so you're always moving towards a dominant position, is really important.
Yeah, very well said, man. Hey, Jason, let me ask you this. For a lot of people listening out there, people who train jiu-jitsu at all levels oftentimes are curious how effective they actually can be in a self-defense situation. Thankfully, a lot of us that train, generally speaking, we're not the ones out starting trouble or getting in bar fights usually. It's usually, usually a little more level-headed than that, most of us anyway. Right. You mentioned something that I think is important for anyone that trains to hear, and that is like stress management. You talk about stress management and emotional intelligence. What are some of the big categories of stress management to be aware of for people that do train and find themselves in a hand-to-hand situation, a self-defense situation?
Well, anytime we get into a situation that's stressful, or we have a fear response where our sympathetic nervous system is flooded with norepinephrine chemicals, when I would assault a target, let's say I'm doing a hostage rescue, if I'm coming in and I'm running from the helicopter or vehicle into the building, I'm already hyperventilating, over breathing. I go up and I crack the door open and run in, and I minimize the amount of oxygen to my brain, so I'm not thinking clearly, and I am not as steady as I'm trying to get that surgical shot off. And most of the enemy we fought against would use their own children as human shields in front of them. So I really learned on the battlefield how to control my emotions and to mitigate my stress. So if I am running towards a building and I'm, I can't help but hyperventilate or overbreathe, I try to start calming myself down by breathing in through my nose and exhaling out my mouth. And by doing that, I'm activating that nitric oxide. So I'm maximizing the amount of oxygen that's getting to my brain. And when I'm going and putting my hand on the door, I'm breathing in through my nose and I'm exhaling as I'm pushing the door open. And now I'm much more steadier. I've maximized the oxygen in my brain and I'm able to think more clear so that I can get that surgical shot off if necessary. It's the same on the street, really. If you're about to get into a fight and somebody's yelling at you. One of the drills I teach is angry face drill. I just have I drill through a scenario on, redirecting somebody into a takedown or whatever. And then I do it where they're screaming and yelling at you and freaking out. It's just noise. It's just sound coming out of a hole in a person's face. Sticks and stones, the words don't hurt you. They're just noise. So I don't think about that. I'm always talking out loud when I'm approaching somebody. Hey, it's going to be okay. Calm down. Everything's going to be all right. I'm not even really talking to them. I'm talking to my own ego and I'm calming myself down so that I can think clearly. On the mat, it's very similar. I'm just very calm and very relaxed when I'm approaching somebody. I don't get too stressed out. If I start getting stressed out right off the bat, start breathing and maximize that oxygen to your brain. In grappling, in striking, for instance, every time you hit, you're exhaling, right? You're exhaling. And so which causes you to inhale. So you're breathing the entire time. But in grappling, you're like, okay, I'm going to hold my breath, grab a hold of this guy. As soon as I get him taken down, then I'm going to exhale and get it. But then he starts turning and now he's panning. Now I'm still holding my breath. And then I'm just staring at his wrist and trying to hold on as tight as I can. Right. So in grappling, I teach the same things. Anytime I'm reaching out and putting hands on people, I'm exhaling. So I'm breathing, I'm getting that flow. It's just reminding me to breathe the entire time. So it makes me more effective. It makes me less fatigued. And, I can think clearer and have a better idea of what I'm going to use for my counter or for my takedown or what it is on my approach. Yeah. So stress mitigation is crucially important. Mastering breathing while I'm grappling is one of the most important things you can do.
That's great. I really like that. Yeah, I could definitely see where. So I used to work security in nightclubs back in the day when I was younger, and the adrenaline that hits you when things pop off. It's even in just like a simple. I mean, I can only imagine like at your level the things you've been through. But in a bar fight, even man, things can get real hectic real quick. Your adrenaline can spike up, and a 2-minute altercation can feel like you just ran an hour marathons because you don't control your breathing well and you're hyperventilating like you said. So I think that's tremendous advice that you just gave. And I also like how you paired it with how to use that in everyday training. Like when you're reaching for grips, exhale. When you're controlling something, make sure to be mindful of your breathing. And that's something we've even seen people like Hicks and Gracie be real adamant about, is the importance of breathing and controlling your heart rate, your emotions. You mentioned also that the idea of someone screaming, someone being very volatile and very aggressive and trying to remain calm under those circumstances. What are some other things you like to do to instill emotional intelligence in people that you're teaching that kind of help them stay calm when things are either a very dangerous situation or B, just a very chaotic situation?
Well, again, talking is really important and trying to de-escalate with your voice. Most of the people we fought against on the battlefield didn't speak English. So even though they didn't understand what it was that I'm saying, my tone and my demeanor would calm them down. Because I would have good, firm control of them, they would say, okay, this guy has control of me, but he's talking calmly. He doesn't appear like he wants to hurt me. And they would tend to be less prone to resist. After that situation I had with that guy where I nearly beat him to death, the next time I hit a target, and this was several months later, I did the exact same thing. I put my knee on his chest. I grabbed a hold of his hands, but this time I very calmly went down and said, salam alaikum to him. And as he's waking up and shaking, he's like, okay, that's weird. And then he's immediately responding with an alaikum salam, which, peace be upon you, back. It's our natural greeting. And I'm helping him up. Then I'm putting him into the wall and then I'm cuffing him. He's like, well, this guy he has control of me, but he's calm and he's relaxed, right? And so I thought, man, I almost killed a guy a few months ago because I didn't control my own emotions. I just went hard in, violence of action. So by controlling myself and by controlling my emotions, even though I was amped up, I was able to resettle and calm myself down. When you get into that fear response and that sympathetic nervous system and that norepinephrine spikes through your body and you're amped up, if you can start breathing and calming yourself down and talking and relaxing yourself, the norepinephrine's still in your system. So it puts almost everything into slow-mo. That's what most people consider the zone, because I'm calm, I'm maximizing the oxygen in my brain, I'm using good critical thinking, but at the same time, I've already got that neurochemistry zapping through my body. So now I can see faster, everything seems to be in slow-mo, I can move quicker, I can make better decisions when I'm moving forward. I would use the same thing on the mat. Just take a look at them, start calming yourself down, relax, and then focus on what the task is. What's my task, man? Get grips, get control of something, whatever your specialty is. Go for that low single or pull guard, whatever it is. You know what I mean?
That's excellent.
And just be task after task after task. And don't worry about their face and their noise. And if you're in a bar or anything like that, just be like, what's the threat? The threat is his hands. Yeah. So I always always at people's hands, and I look at their waistline. Does he have a bulge or something tucked under his waist? Does he have a knife or something hidden away? So those are my threats. His face isn't a threat to me. The sounds coming out of his face aren't a threat to me. So immediately I'm looking at what's my approach angle. If I'm in law enforcement, I'm looking at his recover concealment in case he does draw something that I can maneuver to, but I'm always flanking. I'm always trying to get that side angle and come in and approach from the side or approach from the back versus going into a face-to-face confrontation with somebody.
That's great. I really like that. Jason, let me ask you this. Do you think that for the people out there that are wondering how effective they would actually be using their jiu-jitsu in a self-defense situation, do you find that most people are able to pretty naturally react with the skills that they've built and without really having to think about it when the adrenaline hits and when they're being attacked? Did you find that your skills were pretty quickly accessible without you having to really think much about it?
Yeah, especially if you're drilling a lot and you're rolling a lot. The more that you roll, the more relaxed you're going to be. Regardless, they put anybody on the mat. You should be calm enough to go, okay, well, I know what to do. I'm not going to fish out. I have my things that I really like to do. I'm going to test them against this guy. And it's pretty rare you're going to run into somebody like that on the street or on the battlefield. Yeah, like you said, if they're a guy that rolls or a guy that's trains, he's probably not going to fight you either because we know what the consequences are.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very well said, man. Let me ask you this. Something important with self-defense, I feel like, and that doesn't get talked about enough, in my opinion, is situational awareness. I assume this is something you probably go through with your clients and with the people that you teach a lot. Yeah. What are some big points that you like to express to people about situational awareness to recognize problems or danger before it even becomes a thing?
Sure. And this is something that I teach a lot of women, especially going off to college, because dads will come up to me and be like, hey, I've academically prepared her for the world, but her situational awareness is terrible. So first and foremost, being off your phone is crucially important until you're in a safe place. When you're in your car and it's locked and the vehicle's running and you have it in gear, then you can look at your phone and kind of relax. But if you're walking around on the street, you're asking to be a victim. In fact, that's what people are targeting. And you can sit in a Target parking lot and watch people go in and out and just be like, who would I kidnap? Who would I attack? And it's always the people that are kind of hunched over looking at their phone, sinking back into the earth. Another thing is clearing your path. So if I'm walking, say, from my vehicle to target, is my path from point A to point B clear? And then I open up my aperture. Is there people off to the left or right that can maneuver towards it? And if it is, then I turn around and leave. I'm not going to walk into a scenario like that. Intuition is really important to listen to, and women are more effective at it than men. Men, we turn off our intuition because it makes us look weak, right? If you're walking down a dark alley and your intuition's like, do not go down there, dude. And you're like, nah, shut up. I'm just being a sissy. I'm going to go down there and do what I want. So we tend to turn ours off a little bit, but women have a very good intuition. I always tell women their first line of defense is intuition. So if something feels creepy, it probably is. So be alert and look around and remove yourself from that situation. My wife actually, when our daughter was 2 or 3 years old, was pushing her into a Babies R Us back when there was Babies R Us. And a carload of guys cruised by her really slow. And when she went into the store, she did what she did. And as she's coming out, her hair was coming up on the back of her neck. She felt really uncomfortable. So she paused and looked out the window, and she could see guys over there waiting on the other side of our car. So she went and got the manager, and he shooed them away, and they took off running, whatever. But listening to your intuition is incredibly important. So clearing your path, if you can clear your path from your vehicle or from a store window, I would do that first from point A to point B. Then as you're walking outside, look left and right. And Is there anything that's going to be maneuvering in on you as you're moving towards your vehicle? When you walk into restaurants, the big thing I teach, and I teach it to my daughter, is as soon as we walk in, I'm like, are there any threats? And she'll look around. Nope. And then the next thing that's most important is, where are the exits? If somebody comes in here causing problems, where are my exits? And she immediately starts pointing them all out. A big one in restaurants and bars is get behind the bar, because usually you got projectiles, you've got weapons, knives, things back there. And it usually routes into the kitchen, which is your escape. And there's knives and projectiles in the kitchen. And there's always a back door going out to a dumpster or whatever. So I would maneuver my way out that way and get away from things as much as possible. But noticing those exits and noticing what weapons that you do have around you, knives, forks, bottles, whatever, so that you can throw projectiles. Should somebody come in with a gun or is just acting up, obviously removing yourself away from that situation is number one. But number two, having a good understanding of where you're out and what weapons are around you should things escalate unnecessarily.
That's tremendous. That's a great lessons to teach your daughter, man. Great lessons to teach anybody, but especially for a young lady. That's outstanding, man. What do you think are some of the most important body language things to keep an eye on? If for people out there that have never been in a fight before, what are some things to look for that are pretty clear indicators usually that someone's either going to try to sucker punch you or just attack you in general?
Yeah. So hands, I'm always looking at people's hands and I'm seeing what their hands are doing. And if they're tucking their head away and looking away, they're usually probably about to do something, especially if their hands are touching their waistline or their hands are bouncing or they're clenching. You see them kind of amping themselves up, preparing for something. So moving out into that flank or crossing the street immediately and getting away from them is really important. Again, worst thing you can do is be on your phone. I try to think of it when I go out for a walk is, what would a bird or whatever, what do they see when they look down on me? Do they see somebody that's hunched over, slowly dying back into the earth, looking at their phone or not paying attention? Or are my shoulders back? Am I taking in the air? Am I having good situational awareness for threats that are around me? Because if I'm a bad guy and I see somebody like that that's scanning, looking for problems, I'm probably not going to pick them. I'm going to pick somebody that isn't being an alert or doesn't have any situational awareness. So first and foremost, always look at hands and waist. I tell women, because they're always being checked out or whatever, that they tend to just be straightforward looking. I go, just look down and look at shoes, look at the hands, waistline, look at shoes. Because if somebody's following you, it's usually easier to pick up somebody that's trailing you by looking at their shoes in a crowd than by looking at shirts or tops or things. With men, I also say when we're crossing by people, you never get eye contact with them because it's hey, what are you looking at? Scenario, you're escalating a thing for unnecessarily. So I'm just looking at their hands, I'm looking at their waistline, and I'm slowly starting to maneuver around that. Starting to maneuver around them like this, where I'm watching them, I'm watching their waistline, but I'm continuing on and giving them as far of a wide berth as possible.
Now, these are all great points, Jason. I think we really do live in a very distracted world these days, and I think that it does make people more susceptible to criminal elements that are out there. I think that thankfully most people out there listening will probably never end up in crazy situations. I think most people who just live normal lives and don't seek trouble or seek dangerous situations will often just have a peaceful life. But it can happen to anybody, man. It can happen to anybody.
Right, and complacency is what makes us victims.
Yeah, 100%.
Being complacent, not being alert, not being prepared. I mean, all the things that I've mentioned take seconds out of your life. Yeah. Just take a few seconds, look around, and is there a threat? Where are my exits? Are there any weapons? Cool. That took 1 second, and I can be prepared in case something does escalate. Yeah. And especially if you're walking around with your family, because you want to be able to maneuver your family away from the threat.
I'm glad you said that, because that's something I'd love to pick your brain on, actually. So I've got two small kids. I got a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. And when it comes to this kind of stuff, my whole perspective on self-defense has changed a lot, because it used to be back in the day that if I was thinking about a self-defense situation, it would be me handling myself, either engaging in a fight or escaping and getting away or whatever. That dynamic changes when you got kids with you. You can't just always run from every fight because you can't leave your kids behind or your wife behind. Yeah. What kind of things do you typically do when you're advising families how to stay safe and say you're in a mall and some crazy thing is going on? What are the first steps?
Well, the same principles apply in regards to if I see a threat, if I see a group of guys that look like thugs, I'm already maneuvering my family away from them or into a store. And I'm always putting myself between the threat and my family. And I let my wife know ahead of time, hey, if I get in any kind of altercation, grab the children, run, get the manager, get out of the store, go all the way out the back, go get to the vehicle. I'll be okay. I'll link up with you there. So regardless what happens to me, as long as they're maneuvering towards safety, that's really important. So I'm always kind of shifting my body around. Now, as your children get older, like my daughter's been training since she's 5, she puts her hand on my belt line. So as soon as my arms flare out on either side, then she immediately tucks in kind of behind me and grabs a hold of my belt. And that way, if a group is coming over to my left, I'm pushing her around to my right. And as long as she's holding onto my belt, I know I have her. I don't want to have that separation for if her and I break apart, right? I don't want my 5-year-old just to take off running, right? I'd rather I pick her up and run with her, or I put myself between the threat and her. And she's always got control behind her because I always know where she is along my belt line. So from about 5 all the way up until 25, I would keep daughters back right along her waistline, and she flows really nice with me now when we maneuver around.
That's really interesting.
We can kind of flow in and out of traffic or in and out of a crowded group of people, and they don't know really what we're doing, but we feel like we're in a more dominant position and maneuvering towards a better angle for our own defense. That's where everybody else walking around is just like sheep. So let them be the victims.
Wow, that's really interesting, man. Yes, it's a lot of it. At the end of the day, it comes to just educating your kids and your family to make sure that they know what to do. So that way. It's not just you directing and doing all the work. You basically put a lot of the responsibility on themselves too to help them know what to do.
It all comes in it all comes in the pre-planning. So I just regularly have these conversations. Like I said, as soon as me and my daughter walk into a restaurant, it's been a game we played since she's been 5 years old. Any threats? Nope. She's already calling them out. No threats. There. She kind of rolls her eyes and she goes, plate, knife, spoon, things I can use. So I'm like, okay, good. But she's thinking it. It's in her head. It's always there. So that being prepared ahead of time is going to take away the shock value when something happens. Somebody comes at me with a knife or whatever, and I'm starting to fight this guy, that they don't just stand there frozen and become victims themselves.
That's outstanding.
So we're like, no, pre-plans, you already move out of there. So
I love it. That's really great, man. I appreciate you sharing that. Like I said, I think that, like you said, preparation and situational awareness and all the mental aspects that come with self-defense, like emotional intelligence, controlling your breathing, those are all really important. I really want to get into you next with the actual physical application of things like jiu-jitsu or grappling in a self-defense situation. But before we do that, every episode of the show, I play a game with my guests. It's a game called the Pummel. The Pummel is a series of random questions. Some of these are about jiu-jitsu. Some of them have nothing to do with jiu-jitsu. But if you don't mind, I'd love to play the Pummel with you before we continue.
Cool.
All right. Question 1. What's the worst job you ever had in your life?
I worked in a Christmas tree farm when I was a kid, shearing Christmas trees in the shape of Christmas trees.
Okay. Yeah.
And I worked there with migrant workers, and they're impossible to keep up with. They work so ridiculously hard. So that was the hardest job I've ever had.
Yeah, for sure. I've been there on construction sites. I've been in that same thing. I'm just like, dude, I suck at this. I'm so slow. That's awesome. What do you think is a secret talent that you have that people might not know about?
I'm pretty calm, I think. I don't ever get amped up. I do get angry and stuff, but it kind of sits underneath the surface. So I would say being calm is probably my secret weapon. That's
excellent. Great answer. What do you think is the worst injury that you've ever had?
I've never had any broken bones. I've torn my pec off the bone before. I took a ricochet in the ankle. I've been blown up. I don't know who pick.
I'll tell you what, man, these are much different answers than I usually get. Usually it's people like, I tore my MCL going for defending a heel hook.
Honestly, the pec tore took me the longest to heal. It took like 6 months. Everything else just kind of healed up quick. Actually, I had some shrapnel come up to the surface on my arm from probably 8 years ago. So I was picking at it and a piece of metal came out. I was like, that's weird.
What the hell is this? Yeah. Jeez. Yeah. I think, you get extra points because I think you're the first guest that's ever responded with that you've been blown up. So you definitely get extra points for that answer for sure.
That's good.
What do you think is your favorite bad food to eat?
Chicken wings.
Chicken wings, good choice.
And I ate huge amounts of them all the time.
What's your go-to? What's your favorite flavor?
Hot.
Hot, just hot. Yeah.
Hot.
What do you dip them in?
Oh, ranch.
Ranch. Good answer. Good.
Yeah.
I have people that just are so committed to blue cheese. I can't do blue cheese. I don't know what it is. I can never acquire that taste, I don't think.
It's good, but ranch is better.
Ranch is better. Ranch is king, for sure. What do you think was the scariest moment of your life?
I got into a helicopter crash. That was pretty scary.
I imagine.
I was in a helicopter on a different time that got shot to pieces. That was scary. I would say that's the scariest because you can't do anything. I don't mind getting shot at on the ground because I can maneuver, I can fight, I can do whatever, but just sitting there waiting to die is pretty scary.
That must be a tough one for sure. Yeah, especially if you're not the pilot. Yeah, you're just in the back. So that's crazy, man.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you survived it. Obviously.
Me too.
What do you think is your favorite grappler of all time, or let's say your favorite mixed martial artist of all time?
Oh, Mighty Mouse.
Mighty Mouse.
Probably.
Good answer. Yeah, man.
I'd say he's the best. For as far as grapplers, man, there's so many good ones. I mean, obviously, there's one king in it. He gets enough attention. So yeah, the best is the best. The
best is the best.
Gotta acknowledge. Yeah,
good
give
choice.
It to Ryan. Yeah.
Good choice. Yeah, I also love that you pointed out Mighty Mouse, man. He's someone that I think there's a really good argument for being the pound for pound greatest because, unfortunately, his weight class and his whole division didn't get as much emphasis as I feel it could have, and so for that reason he sometimes goes under the radar as far as when people mention their favorite or the best ever. So I appreciate you mentioning him, Max. I think he's one of my favorites of all time.
You almost have to watch it in slow mo.
Oh, I mean, yeah, absolutely.
He's picking people up and submitting them before they hit the ground. Yeah.
Yeah, the suplex armbar combo. It's unbelievable. Yeah. Unbelievable fighter. Yeah, unbelievable. It's a great choice, man. What do you think is your biggest phobia?
Spiders.
Yeah. Good. That's a good one. Your favorite sports team?
I don't really watch too much team sports. I guess the Kansas City Chiefs because I have a couple friends that play for them.
Oh, cool. Nice.
So I would say them just out of loyalty to friends, and they win all the Super Bowls now. So
that's awesome.
They're good at it.
Good team to support then, for sure. We talked about your favorite bad food to eat. What's your most hated food? What's something that you cannot eat no matter what?
Durian, the Thai fruit.
Yeah. The spiky fruit. Yeah.
It's horrible.
Is it the texture? Is it the slimy texture or the taste that does it for you?
I think it's the taste. You're like, oh, it tastes like caramel. No, it doesn't. It tastes like ass. It's horrible.
Durian might be Thai for ass fruit. You never know. I'll have to verify that with my translator. But what do you think is something you spend way too much money on?
Aside from chicken wings, probably guns.
Guns, yeah, I could see that. For sure. Who's your favorite superhero?
Thor, probably.
Choice.
Yeah.
If you could have a superpower, what would you choose?
Fly.
Fly. Good answer. Yeah. Good answer. What's your biggest pet peeve?
I would say in the gym when people leave plates on the bar, that bothers me.
Yeah. People who aren't conscientious. Yeah.
I try to make it, I'm like, well, I got a couple extra reps in by cleaning up their mess. So it's warmed me up a little bit. So I try and put it in a positive light, but yeah, I would like to throw that plate at them sometimes.
That's great. I love it. Yeah, I love it. Final question for the Pummel game, and this one's going to be a fun one because I've never actually asked this to someone with your kind of background. I have asked almost every guest that I interview this question, but this will be a fun one for you. A zombie apocalypse breaks out right now. What's the first thing you do?
Oh, I just grab my gun and go to work.
Yeah, it's pretty easy for you.
Well, it's like a dream.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like What do you?
Best day ever.
I know. Yeah, it's like Christmas. What do you think? What do you think? What would you advise the average family to do in a zombie apocalypse if it breaks out? What's the first thing that they should do? Do you think?
Oh, barricade your house.
Barricade your house.
Barricade your doors and windows, and find which room you can barricade the most, and stash your food and water in there.
That's a great answer. Now, this is actually pretty cool for me because I get to very selfishly do something that most people have to pay a lot of money to have Jason do. I want you to analyze my zombie apocalypse plan because it's always the same. I always bring this up on the show. I've always said that if you could get a group together and lock down a Costco and barricade a Costco, you have a big square building so you can put people on the roof. There's usually 1 or 2 entrances. There's like the back docks and I guess the one-way entrance that they check your card before you come in and out.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on that? What would be the pros and the cons of locking down a Costco in your opinion?
Well, the pros are you have an unlimited supply of food, beverage, and toilets. Yeah, all the things you need to survive. There's clothing, there's sleeping equipment. So yeah, it's pretty great. The cons would be there's not many, but you don't have ammo in there or weapons at Costco. Sure. So, but you do have, some tools and things that you can use that are as a weapon should they start breaking their way out. But you would have a lot of stuff in there to lock the place down with.
That's good. Well, it sounds like I got a seal of approval there a little bit, so that's good. It sounds like I had a good plan. So if you give it a stamp, I'm good with that. And
I was thinking about it, to be honest with you. If we have like an EMP attack and the power goes out, there's a Costco like 5 minutes from my house. So
right. It's like,
that'll be the first place I raid.
It's just there, dude. It's just there.
I don't need a prep. I got Costco in that
exactly.
place. So. Yeah, I like your plan.
I appreciate that. And that was the final question for the Pummel game. Congratulations, you win. You got your double underhooks. So Jason, continuing with our conversation about self-defense, so I want to get in more to like the physical side of things now. So what do you think are some of the most useful jiu-jitsu skills for dealing with an unarmed attacker? What are some things that you would really encourage people to focus on and some things you would maybe disregard when it comes to applying it in real life?
Disregard, I would say outside of competition, I wouldn't pull guard. I wouldn't put myself in a bad position. For me, the most effective thing in unarmed combat is framing into the Russian tie, and then every variation of taking the back or going into singles or doubles from the Russian tie, clinch. Everything comes off the Russian tie for me. So that's an area where I focus the most.
I really like that. Yeah, for a close quarter armed attacker, let's say obviously we're talking about someone that's not armed. Now let's say that there is someone that has a weapon, and you're in a situation where you just have no choice but to fight. What would you say are the main objectives for a jiu-jitsu student? What things would you encourage them? They're on a bus, someone pulls a knife, and it's just yeah.
Well, get a hold of it. Whatever hand has a knife or gun or whatever, get both hands on it as quickly as possible. Put as much weight as you can to put it down towards the ground, and then work your attacks from there, whether you're putting on a Kimura or, I probably wouldn't go too much into, variations of arm locks and stuff, just because you're always, especially with a gun, you're turning it back towards yourself. So I would go more Russian tie, and I would attack that arm and pry it down and try to apply as much pressure to the elbow and break it, and or get him in a Kimura and then break the shoulder and get it to pop out that way, and keeping it away from you, always pushing the weapon away from you in a Kimura. So.
That's great advice. So yeah, and so basically just going after the weapon itself is the best thing. So secure.
Yeah, always go for the weapon.
That's great.
Get the weapon.
That's great. Yeah. No, it's great to hear that, because I think a lot of people have different things that they think is the right call. Like, do you try to knock him out? Do you try to get behind him? I think that it's nice to know what statistically is the best thing to do. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Well, initially you have to close the distance, right? So if they have a knife and they're striking, so I'm striking at their skull and also chopping down on their arm and trying to get it down until I can get my 2-1-1. So you do have to do a little bit of outside to inside to close the distance to get a grip on them. But I would always be working those angles and go for the knife or gun as quickly as possible and get both hands on it and try and control it and steering it back into them.
Jason, in your instructional that you filmed with us, Defensive Tactics for Guardians, you show several techniques geared towards a member of law enforcement. You teach things like vehicle extraction and subduing an assailant and working in a tight hallway and various other situations that law enforcement professionals may be faced with. Something I really appreciated about watching it was how adaptable jiu-jitsu and grappling techniques are in situations where I wouldn't have really thought of it being so applicable. Like, obviously I know grappling is a great self-defense self-defense and self-defense tool and very useful in combat situations. But I would have never expected like the Russian tie to be such an effective way to pull a suspect out of a vehicle, for example. Were these tactics that you learned in the military over time as your training enhanced, or was this a direct result of your years in jiu-jitsu and judo?
Well, both. So what we would do is we would go, okay, what is the scenario? What happened? That usually it's something that went bad, right? Pulling somebody out of a car and we ended up getting in a fight, or they got a gun or whatever, and doing it from the driver's side, from the passenger side, from the back, doing all these different scenarios. And then we just drill it. Like, well, let's find solutions. What's the best way to mitigate any kind of threat that this guy might pose upon us? And so we drilled it and tested it. And, if I can beat my own guys with it using mostly using grappling for control, using these control techniques, then I can use it against anybody.
That's outstanding. Well, for anyone out there that wants to see this stuff, it's really fascinating stuff. I think it's really great knowledge and information for anyone to have, whether you're in law enforcement or not. It's called the Master Chief Series, Defensive Tactics for Guardians. It's available right now at BJJFanatics.com. And Jason, I assume if it's called Master Chief Series, we got more coming, probably, right? You have some more instructionals.
There's a couple others that I'm looking at. I had to look at too what was selling, but I made this video for a very specific reason, and it was because I just come from New York and they told me, hey, look, we can't. Our head shed says that, our bosses say that we can't have Navy SEALs in here training us. I'm like, man, I just want cops to be better at their job and be more effective. So that's why I created it. So it wasn't for money. But yeah, I'm looking at a couple other things. I have one that's pretty much done, self-defense for young women. And that, because I have daughters, I'm very passionate about it. And then I'm looking at some others that I'm just trying to find what makes the most sense, because it's kind of a saturated market for the most part. And really, I just wanted to help people, just because I made it for law enforcement or for SWAT teams or Tier 1 special operations groups. It's for everybody. If you got to clear your house or protect your house and you're getting into hand-to-hand situations, or you're a bouncer or any of these things, all those techniques and tactics that are built in there will help you out. Protect your family,
That's incredible, man. Well, like you said, there's a big market for it, but there's not as many people that have the same credentials as you do, man. So I think it's really exciting that you're sharing all this knowledge with us here and making these instructionals. So I really do appreciate that. Speaking of the work that you do, tell us about the Four Pillars Collective. I know that you have Dave Camarillo as part of it. You have a lot of really great people involved in this project, and it's nonprofit. How did that all come together? What's the primary focus?
Well, back when I told you, we brought in all these guys from all over the world to teach us, different scenarios and come up with solutions. There was only a few guys that really had answers for us. And Gustavo Machado, who I have a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he's really good. Dave Camarillo, who I have a black belt in Judo from, he's excellent. His combative system, guerrilla combatives, is excellent. It's really great. It's Tier 1. Conan Silveira from America Top Team, very patriotic. He has a background in special operations himself from the Brazilian Special Forces. So, he's just a super giving, wonderful person. So, I'm like, well, I used him there when I was in. I'll use them while we're out. And I have some former SWAT team cops. And you really, if you're guys that, like I said, if you're getting up at 5 a.m. and you're going to the gym and putting in time on the mat and then doing a full day of work, those are the guys that I want to bring in. So ex-special operations guys and ex-cops, especially SWAT team guys, because, they've done all the extra work and they deserve to make a little extra money on the side, training people to keep our families safe. So it's really important to me. So yeah, like I said, it was just a solution to, at the time when riots and stuff were going on, there really wasn't too many groups that were teaching effective combative techniques, defensive tactics to law enforcement that was well-rounded. Everybody was just like, pick a guy up, slam him, then use jiu-jitsu, or beat the hell out of him and then use jiu-jitsu. And so I film all of our scenarios. I film everything and then I give it to the guys. I'm like, this is what you're going to look like on CNN. Were you emotionally in control? Were you using dominant positions? Did you effectively cuff them? Did you let your biases get the best of you? Things like that we add into all of our training. So I've really enjoyed it. The guys that train with me also have a really good time. There's only one other group that I've seen that is doing something very similar. It's BJJ Cops. I just do want to give them credit for the effort that they're doing. And it's all a group of cops that travel around and using effective techniques and tactics to train law enforcement like we are, to make everybody better at their job so that, you're not using excessive force if it's unnecessary.
That's great, man. Well, that's definitely a great mission, man. What would you say are some of your major goals for 2023? What are some things you hope to accomplish by the time the year is over?
I work with a lot of first responders and special operations guys and kind of getting their life back after they retire. So I help them with PTSD. I help them with, the transition from having that one life. We have some former UFC guys and stuff that are with us, and a couple pro athletes, professional football players, and just helping them transition, because guys give everything into, one thing, whether it's grappling or MMA or being a cop or being a special operations guy or whatever. You put your whole life towards this, and then when you retire, it's just gone. And everything you've dedicated, now you have all these injuries, and a lot of guys are addicted to pharmaceuticals. And, they're going back to your families. You're like, hey, team, let's get back together. I'm like, team, where you been, dude? You've just been singularly focused on your mission all this time, and you've blown us off. So guys, you tend to become, hit the bottle a little too hard, and they just need a new purpose and a new mission. So I'm working with a lot of guys doing that right now. And that's what I'm hoping to continue to do and build over the next 4 or 5 years, is helping strong people become good mentors for the younger population.
Wow, man. Well, that's a really significant mission, man. I appreciate you doing that. That's I have friends of mine that served in the military and deal with different levels of PTSD. So to hear people like yourself out there facing that head on, that really is pretty tremendous, man. I really commend you on that. Well, folks, unfortunately, we're fresh out of time. Jason, man, I've enjoyed this conversation so much, man. I really appreciate you bringing all this great information to the table today. It was really fascinating just to hear how a SEAL and how an instructor teaches and thinks about self-defense, because we hear a lot of people talk about self-defense, but very few of them have actually been in 16 combat tours. So really, really appreciate your time today. You're welcome back anytime you want to come back.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you, Ryan.
Absolutely. For anyone out there that wants to keep up with Jason, it's very easy to do so. He's active on Facebook. It's 4 Pillars Collective. Make sure you guys are following that page. On Instagram, he has 2 options. He's got 4 Pillars Collective, the Instagram page, and then he's also got Hendo Security. That's his personal security firm. So check those out. Also, his website is hendosec.com. Hendo, S-E-C for security.com. Then you could also check out 4pillarscollective.com if you want to learn more about the 4 Pillars Collective program. If you guys want to learn from Jason, you can learn from him anywhere in the world here at BJJ Fanatics. He's got a great instructional with us called Masterchief Series Defensive Tactics for Guardians, which we talked about in depth today. So if that's content that you're interested in learning about, go to bjjfanatics.com and pick it up. And that's going to do it for this episode, everybody. I really appreciate you tuning in. Please stay tuned for the next episode of the BJJ Fanatics podcast.